Yes, good morning. I'm recording this meeting. I've been recording several of the other CoC membership meetings, and I'm very happy to say we now have a new website. And I'll show you, I'll drop the link to the new website in the chat, and all of our meetings, our presentations, at least over the last several meetings, are recorded, and there's links to those. The trainings that we have done, there's some links to those on our website. The last meeting we had a harm reduction training that's on there. So I know some of you were asking about that. So I'm very excited that we now have this new website. I'll put that link in the chat for you all. In case you want to check it out. But welcome, good morning. This is the Northern Colorado Continuum of Care General Membership Meeting. I'm Kelly Pryor, I'm the director of the CoC. If you're newer to the CoC membership, just some kind of background level setting of what we're all here to do today. So the Continuum of Care General Membership is really just a network of folks that are interested and have some kind of overlap with our homeless response system in Larimer-Weld County. And we're here to just receive updates on things that are going on in the homelessness and housing world, and also have some trainings, provide information on best practices. And if we have time, updates on our agencies. We may have to shift a little bit on how we do that today, but we're just very happy to have you all here. If you're just joining, please put your name and agency in the chat. I would appreciate that. And so we're going to kick off here. I have some updates for all of you. And then later on, we have a presentation from John Paul Morosi from the Denver Metro Fair Housing Center on fair housing, issues of fair housing and kind of where we're at in Colorado. Then we also, after that, have a presentation from Rachel Kirkland, our HMIS administrator, on our point in time count and housing inventory count data. And then after that, we have a spotlight on one of our newer Continuum of Care partners, the Community Economic Defense Project, and what their services and resources are that might be beneficial to your clients. So to kick us off here, I just wanted to give some updates on the Division of Housing transformational dollars. If you're not familiar with these, the transformational homelessness program and then transformational housing grant program were funded through the American Rescue Plan Act COVID money. I can't remember how many millions of dollars it was, but it was a lot of money that came to the Division of Housing to address housing and homelessness specifically. They've started to make awards for the first round of those, and I'm really excited that for the housing transformational grant, we've had two projects currently that have been funded. So the Loveland Housing Authority received $3.7 million for land acquisition for affordable housing. And then Fort Collins Habitat for Humanity received $720,000 for their Harmony Cottages project. So that's really exciting, bringing new, expanding our housing, affordable housing projects in our area. I know that the Division of Housing has several other rounds of awards. Those were just the first, so I'm sure more news to come on that soon, and fingers crossed for some of our other projects that have applied. For the homelessness transformational grant program, they just rolled out their first round of awards as well, and we had $500,000 was awarded to Homeward Alliance for, and then other project partners for developing a Larimer County strategic plan on homelessness. So essentially, kind of bridging all of the different cities' plans around homelessness and the county's plan. the work that's happening with the continuum of care and then other work groups, and just kind of putting that all together in a kind of cohesive strategic plan that's coordinated. So that's very exciting. And then United Way of Weld County received $2.3 million for homeless prevention, bridge housing, some emergency shelter, and then also to hire someone to improve data quality in Weld County around homelessness as well. So lots of capacity building, which is very exciting. And then just another update on some funding. Since the last time we met, the HUD annual Continuum of Care program grant that we apply for every year was awarded, and so I will not at this meeting, but at a future meeting, I will explain all about the HUD CoC program grant competition. It's a very fun time, but it does bring in about $1.5 million to our area to address homelessness, and so it is really important for us. But it's a very competitive grant and or a grant competition, and our community is ranked next to every other continuum of care in the country. I can't remember the exact number, but it's over 200 continuums of care. And this was our second year as our own CoC doing this, and so I just am very happy to report that we improved our overall score from last year. So we're on an upward trajectory, which didn't bring us more money in this year, but it is definitely a good thing to be scoring higher year over year. And I'm definitely hopeful that this coming year, which the competition, which should start very soon, I would imagine in the next month or two, they'll announce the competition, that we're going to be in a good position to kind of expand the money that's coming into Northern Colorado through this. So any questions on any of the funding, or if others know about other funding available, if there's open grants right now, or if I missed an award on this list that you all know about, I'd be more than happy to hear. Yeah, Chuck?
Did you say that the Loveland Housing Authority received 3.7 mil? Is that what
Yes.
you said?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So those of you who are just joining us, if you could please put your name and your agency in the chat, I would appreciate that. And I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter of the day. We have John Paul Morosi from the Denver Metro Fair Housing Center. He's going to be providing us a presentation training on fair housing issues, and I will let him kind of explain more about himself and the content for today. But I want to just highlight for everyone, one of the things that we're going to ask you to do is, because the way that this we're able to have John Paul come and share with us is he tracks the presentation, like who he gives presentations to, and so that they can continue to get funding in order to provide these kinds of presentations to the community. So I'm going to put in the chat here a link to just a survey for participants that are viewing this. So if you wouldn't mind just taking 30 seconds to fill this out while John Paul is introducing himself, we would really, really appreciate that. And I will turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. Wow. I am so excited to be here with all of you from Northern Colorado, such a beautiful part of the state. And I want to say a big thank you to Kelly for inviting me here today, and also for graciously agreeing to serve as our chat monitor during the presentation. Let's see. Yeah, the work that you do is vitally important. You're at the cutting edge of addressing the issue that's on everybody's minds, top of mind, which is dealing with the housing crisis and helping people transition out of homelessness. What we're going to do today is look at how discrimination against people in different forms factors into the work that you do. One big caveat is I am not an attorney. I do not dispense legal advice. We do take pride in providing accurate, up-to-date information on fair housing laws. But if you have a specific legal question, beyond the general definitions of the laws, you need to consult with an attorney in your area. Let's see. Yeah, the demographic survey is so important. That the reason we can do these presentations for free is because of the grant money that we get, and all of our grantors look for the data on who attends, and of course it's anonymous. Yeah, so don't be concerned. We are going to cover a lot of information very rapidly this morning. That doesn't mean I won't stop along the way. So you have a burning question, put it in the chat right away while it's on your mind, and Kelly should feel free to interrupt me. It's not interrupting, it's just adding to the conversation. Let me know what the question is and I'll address it immediately. And also to know that you will be receiving a resource sheet with links to the detail on all of the topics that I'm going to be covering here today. So you don't have to feel you have to take extensive, copious notes. You'll be able to go to the resource sheet and get the detail on any of the topics that we'll be looking at. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and take you to the PowerPoint. Here we are. Can everyone see the PowerPoint, or can somebody just confirm that you've got it on your screen?
Yes, it's there.
Okay, so our topic for today is fair housing, know your rights and responsibilities. This is tailored to this group because I understand that we have representation here, not only from consumers and advocates for housing consumers, but also housing providers. And I'm happy to say that you're the very first group to receive or be part of this presentation. As part of our campaign, we're undertaking a statewide campaign to end discrimination against people based on source of income, which is against the law in this state, as we will detail later. And Northern Colorado is the first regional area where we're bringing this presentation, so we're delighted to be here. Here's what we'll be covering. Essentially 5 points. What's the history of fair housing? How did it come about? Who's protected by the law? What are discriminatory housing practices? What do they look like today in 2023? A good bit of focus on issues concerning persons with disabilities, reasonable accommodations, reasonable modifications, and that most popular issue of all, the emotional support animals. And also we'll be giving some tips and guidance and examples throughout the whole presentation, and wrap up with what to do if you're working with someone who needs to file a complaint. So let's start by inviting you to put one word in the chat. When I say the word home, you think of the word what? What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word home? So go right ahead, put your word in there, and Kelly will be reading them out as they come in. Families look like a lot of different kinds of, take a lot of shapes and forms today. So home has different meanings for different people. What are we seeing, Kelly?
We're seeing, well, the first one was my pet. We have a lot of safety, family, community, comfort, peace, roots, safe haven, warmth, security, love, expensive.
Yeah, safe haven, warmth, love, all of those things, all those positive, good feelings that we associate with the word home. And so as the center of the slide shows, love is at the center of it. People need to feel safe. They need to feel they're in a place where they're connected, grounded. And what we're going to be talking about today is what gets in the way of people experiencing home as they would like it to be. And that's discrimination. And what form does it take? So we are here with a mission very similar to yours. We are totally supportive of the work that you do. Our mission is to eliminate housing discrimination and promote housing choice for all people. We do that through education sessions like this, advocacy, and as you'll hear, enforcement of the law. We're in existence for 10 years now. We're celebrating our 10th anniversary all year this year. We're funded by HUD as a Fair Housing Initiative program. We are the only organization of our kind in the state of Colorado. And even though our name is Denver Metro, we are charged by HUD to do this type of fair housing education throughout the entire state. So we will be touching every corner of this great state of Colorado in the coming months. These are the counties where we do our full panoply of services. And as you can see, we go as far north as Boulder. What does this mean? It means that here we can work with an individual to actually bring a complaint and do an investigation and collaborate with HUD if it's a federal violation, or with the Civil Rights Division of the state if it's a state violation. So it's very important, I think, for all of us to recognize that these laws don't fall from the sky. This brief video will give you a grounding in the blood, sweat, tears, and at times the lives that were given to pass the Fair Housing Law. It tells the story of the 7 days between the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, a leading voice for the creation of the Fair Housing Law, and Congress passing the law in April 1968. Kelly, if you can confirm that you're getting the audio, I appreciate that.
I'm not hearing the audio.
Okay, I know what that means. I just need to enable the video audio function. Do that. Let's see. So while I'm doing that, I'll just point out that although the federal law was passed in 1968, Colorado was actually the very first state in the nation to pass a fair housing law. And that was in 1959, 9 years before the passage of the federal law. I'm just trying to get to function here that will enable me to, oh, here we go, optimize video clip.
There's someone in the chat said there should be a checkbox to select at the bottom left when you share your screen that says share sound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's okay. Here we go. Apologize. My error. Let's see. Okay, here we go. And optimize. Share sound. There we go. Very good. One more time. And that should do it.
Yeah, there we go.
Sorry about that.
Few in the nation believed that fair housing would in our time become the unchallenged law of this land. And indeed, this bill has had a long and stormy trip.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. Like anybody, I would like to live promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man.
Ladies and gentlemen, Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis.
The death of the prophet of nonviolence set off the worst outbreak of arson, looting, and criminal activity in the nation's history. Washington's ghettos burned within a few blocks of the nation's capital.
The life of a man who symbolized the freedom and faith of America has been taken. And no words of mine can fill the void of the eloquent voice that has been stilled. But this I do believe deeply. The dream of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has not died with him.
President Johnson was willing to speak up and say, we have to pass a fair housing bill.
Hello, Mr. President? Yes, Dick. We're in trouble. We need some help. Yes? I'm afraid of that.
Federal troops, for the first time since the Civil War, took up positions to guard government buildings.
Nothing's probably touchier than your own neighborhood and your own home or your own apartment. The administration, which supported the bill, said this has no chance. The other stuff is okay, but this will kill any politician that touches it.
Well, I just could not live beside them. I don't feel that they should be oppressed. But I moved here because it was a white community.
I have 2 daughters and 2 sons. And if there's too many colored people around here, I definitely will get out.
I think that, well, the property values will immediately go down if they're allowed to move in here in any number.
It seems as though our country is pulling apart into separate societies, where whites have jobs and Negroes have unemployment, where the middle class lives in suburbs and the poor are left in the ghettos, where one group of Americans looks upon another group of Americans with growing mistrust and even dread.
Then the bill went over into the House Rules Committee, and under the chairmanship of the famous Judge Smith, a right-wing segregationist from Virginia, he wouldn't hold hearings on it. He would take the bill home so nobody could act on it, and we were running out of time.
Thousands flowed through the rainy streets of Memphis this day, finishing a march that Dr. King planned to lead in support of striking garbage workers.
How many men must die before we can really have a free and true and peaceful society?
For your presence, Lord. And I know you'll reach out and take mine. You take our hand.
The death of Martin Luther King is a tragic thing, but no legislation should be passed as a memorial to anyone.
In spite of the riots, I am going to support this legislation with all the vigor that I possess.
The laws that we pass up here are for all time. The Martin Luther Kings come and go.
The public reaction to this horror gave the sensible members of the committee a compelling argument that the House Rules Committee had to report that bill out. And I think that's how we got our bill. They just didn't dare bottle it up any longer.
And I have a dream that one day Negroes will be able to buy a house anywhere that their money will carry them.
At long last this afternoon, fair housing for all is now a part of the American way of life. Democracy's work is being done, and the bell of freedom rings out a little louder. We have come some of the way, not near all of it.
Fight still goes on because we unfortunately have the laws, but we don't have the enforcement. That we have changed, but we still have the same kinds of discrimination.
The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights said today that efforts by federal agencies to end housing discrimination have been generally superficial or incomplete.
President Carter has ordered federal agencies to use all means possible to strengthen fair housing programs.
For the first time, people with disabilities and families with children will be protected from housing discrimination.
President Reagan signed legislation today designed to toughen up the nation's fair housing laws.
Why did you take part in this demonstration today? Just because there was a huge crowd, or did you have any personal reason?
Well, I took part in this march today because of Martin Luther King and what he stood for, because this march is what he died for.
You know what he stood for?
Yes. He stood for nonviolence and peace for all men of all kinds. And I think if he died for it, I could carry out what he started.
And that's what we're all about today, carrying out what he started. Each and every one of us has a role to play, whether we're a landlord, a housing provider, an advocate, or consumer, in seeing that the law is understood and followed. So as we can see, 1968 was the landmark legislation passed. There was a Civil Rights Act as early as 1866. But the big move forward was in 68, and then gender was added in the 1970s. And the last major amendments to the federal law took place in 1988, when we added disability and familial status as protected classes, and HUD was given stronger enforcement authority. So who's covered by the law? On the federal level, there are 7 what we call protected classes. So if this is your introduction to fair housing, that's a critical term. Persons who fall into any one of these 7 protected classes can bring a complaint of discrimination based on their status, whether it be race, color, religion, national origin, sex or gender, familial status, or disability. As I mentioned earlier, Colorado was the first state in the country to have a state level law. And at this time, we have 6 protected classes, 2 of which are quite new: ancestry, creed, marital status, sexual orientation, and as of January 1, 2021, source of income. And as you'll be hearing a little later, a brand new bill just passed this past week or two and strengthened the source of income protections, especially for housing voucher holders. And finally, veteran status. So it is against the law to discriminate against a person based on their veteran status as of August 1st, 2022. So what's discrimination look like around the country? The latest data that we have nationwide shows that 45% of all the complaints that have come in have been based on discrimination against people based on their disability. Racial discrimination was number 2, retaliation 3, and discrimination based on sex or gender number 4. Retaliation is an important one to highlight, because please keep in mind that when we talk about discrimination, it's not just when someone's applying to rent an apartment or buy a home. The law continues to apply the entire time an individual is living in their home. Right here in the Denver metro area, we have a similar pattern. where 40% of the complaints we've received in the last couple of years have been relating to disability. Racial discrimination running in number 2, and a fast-growing category, we're seeing more complaints regarding discrimination based on source of income, and that's the reason we have launched the statewide education campaign. So all kinds of transactions are covered by the law, not just renting or buying. As you can see, almost every facet of what happens in the housing market is covered by the fair housing law. These are the kinds of players who are covered by the law: owners of apartments, property managers, real estate firms and brokerages, rental leasing agents, homeowners associations, loan officers, insurance agents, any non-exempt party who violates the law. What kind of housing is covered? Well, just about every kind of housing, with 3 important exemptions on the federal level. First one, probably the biggest in terms of volume, is housing for older persons. And a federally qualified housing for older persons facility is allowed to exclude families with children under the age of 18. So that's the familial status protected class. Every other aspect of fair housing laws apply to the operation of housing for older persons. The second area of exemption are some owner-occupied buildings, no more than 4 units, or single-family housing sold or rented without the use of a broker. And third, housing that's developed and operated by private clubs or organizations that limit occupancy to their members, is also exempt from the federal fair housing laws. In Colorado, single-family housing is exempt if the owner doesn't own more than 3 single-family homes, and the homes are sold or rented without the use of a rental or real estate agent, and there's no discriminatory advertising. So that does remove a lot of the mom and pop kind of operations, but any kind of a typical apartment building that exceeds 4 units or more is going to be covered by the law. So here's some examples of the kinds of discrimination that we have seen or continue to see, unfortunately. Terms and conditions means, for example, putting a lease into place that has a different provision for someone with a disability versus someone who doesn't. Steering is a particularly ugly facet of this. It takes place both in home buying and in renting. And I'll give an example of that a little bit later in the rental market, but the first place that it really turned up was in home buying, where individuals who happen to be persons of color would be steered by a real estate agent from the neighborhood perhaps that they wanted to live in to what the real estate agent would tell them is someplace they'd be more comfortable, which means someplace where there are more people who look like them. Lying about availability, very common. We get a lot of complaints on that. Advertising, believe it or not, there's still stuff going on. Your area of the state, hard hit by the horrible Marshall Fire. We worked with many people displaced by the fire who faced discrimination in different ways. There are parts of the country where good-hearted people would actually place advertisements, say on Facebook, that they would accept and provide temporary housing for white Christian families, which obviously would be a violation of federal law. Threats, intimidation, and coercion once you're living in your apartment, another example. Blockbusting, a term that comes from earlier practices, maybe not as common today, but it's kind of like what Malcolm X said: racial discrimination is like a Cadillac, there's a new model every year. So it's important to remember that we don't work in an adversarial way with professionals working in the real estate and other housing sectors. As a matter of fact, real estate agents have been some of the strongest supporters of the Fair Housing Act, and many complaints come to us from real estate agents, brokers, and firms, and they are protected when they bring a complaint to our attention. They are protected from any retaliation. Just in case you didn't think it was happening, the statistics are there. They continue to come out in national reports. This one from the Urban Institute just a couple of years ago: Black home buyers shown 17% fewer available homes, and 18% fewer units. We know about whitewashing, where in the appraisal process, a Black family, and I know about personally know an individual who works for a community college who happens to be Black, and her neighbor has an identical condo. They were both appraised at the same time for sale. Hers was appraised at $100,000 less than her white neighbor, until she took out all identifying information in the apartment that led, potential buyers to know that she was Black. And then the appraisal bumped right up to her neighbor's level. Here's some examples. I'm not going to read these slides to you. I'm highlighted in red some of the examples of the kinds of discrimination that are continuing to happen today. I'm not going to read in detail. I just want you to know there's an important difference between a realtor and a real estate agent. A person who is a member of the National Association of Realtors has taken a pledge to cooperate and fully affirmatively further fair housing. And there is a detailed policy in place which the realtors do support, and they're one of our most active supporters of conferences and that sort of thing. So racial discrimination basically means treating somebody unfavorably because of their race or because of personal characteristics associated with their race. Discrimination based on color involves us treating someone unfavorably because of the color of their skin. The protection for the religion, policies that restrict the free exercise, practice, or observance of any particular religion would be against the law. And it means freedom of religion and freedom from religion. If a rule hinders a tenant's religious practice, the provider must prove that there's an independent, religiously neutral reason justifying the need for the rule. Steering people happens within religious contexts, specifying preferences for particular religions. These are all examples of violations of the law. Housing providers like shelters, nursing homes that provide meals must accommodate religious-based diets. A shelter can't require participate in religious activities as a condition to housing the homeless, another example. Family status covers families with children under 18 years of age, and also applies to pregnant people or persons planning to have a family. We're going to talk in a little bit about some of the apartment size guidelines. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how discriminatory policies might look. So if we're going to have, for example, a policy in a housing development that includes a curfew, noise, and other rules, it needs to apply to all residents, not just to families. Here's an example of a discriminatory rule. Children cannot play games or make loud noises in business centers. For that to be non-discriminatory, it would read all residents must refrain from making loud noises in business centers. Rules about play, using the swimming pool, or restricting access. A discriminatory rule would be, under no circumstances may children's items be left outside to prevent injuries. Non-discriminatory would be one that personal items kept inside apartments or garage areas and not left outside, so that just benefiting everybody but doesn't zero in on families with children. So if there's an unsafe condition, make it safe for everybody to avoid general liability. And so fair housing and national origin. Obviously, this covers discrimination based on birthplace, ancestry, culture, language, immigration status. The federal housing law, important point, does apply to people regardless of their immigration status. Providers cannot require extra forms of identification, such as a passport, a green card, or social security card, unless they do it for everybody. So the whole idea behind fair housing is equal treatment. Violations include both preferential and adverse treatment. So in other words, if you give preference to one person by national origin, that also would be a violation. Fair housing discrimination based on sex or gender happens when you treat tenants differently because of their sex. And under the Biden administration, and since the Supreme Court ruling on Bostock versus Clinton County, the federal government has become much more specific about the coverage for persons in the LGBTQ plus community. And we had a case right here in the Denver area where Judge Raymond Moore in April 2017 ruled in favor of a lesbian couple with a child. One of the members of the couple was transgender, and the judge ruled that the housing provider in a town north of Denver violated federal law by first stating, well, they wasn't sure that the apartment would be appropriate for them with a child, and then stating in an email that wasn't sure the neighbors would be comfortable with their unconventional lifestyle. So it was a precedent-setting case. That's 6 years ago now. And so the protections have become even stronger than they were a few years ago. These are typical examples. Unfortunately, we're still seeing denying an apartment application, stating that renting to an applicant would violate a landlord's religious practice or beliefs, refusing to renew a lease or put both partners' names on a lease. And let's take a moment to understand how this links to domestic violence. The Violence Against Women Act actually, it's important, number one, to understand that this law, referred to as VAWA, applies to individuals regardless of their gender identity or sexual orientation, not just to women. And I have a whole separate presentation that goes into detail on fair housing law and VAWA. But in essence, domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking, those four behaviors, if they're taking place and they are taking place in a housing facility that gets any kind of federal money in any way, whether there's vouchers involved or federal money was involved in constructing or maintaining the building or rehabbing it, the tenants are covered by VAWA. Domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. And what does this mean? It means it prohibits a landlord from denying assistance, tenancy, or occupancy rights to a tenant who is a victim of these types of violence, or based solely on criminal activity related to an act of violence committed against them. It bars eviction and termination due to the tenant's status as a victim of domestic violence, and requires landlords to maintain survivor-tenant confidentiality. So the important to take away here, if there are landlords listening in, participating today, you have an affirmative obligation to address these behaviors that might be taking place. It applies whether it's taking place within the apartment of co-tenants, if it's taking place between tenants in two different apartments, or if it's involving staff or others employed by the housing provider. The landlord has an obligation to proactively address the issue. So I guess one of the most important provisions is emergency transfer, either within the complex or out of the building completely, to keep the person safe. There are provisions that go beyond the federal law under the domestic violence victims law in Colorado. The landlord may not terminate the lease or rental agreement or impose any penalties on a resident for calls made for police or emergency assistance. This comes out of a history in the past of landlords setting an arbitrary, let's say if the police are called more than 3 times a month, you can be evicted. That would be completely against the law in Colorado. The victim may terminate a residential lease without further obligation due to fear of imminent danger, and the vacating tenant may be responsible for 1 month's rent. The law also, well, it's important to know that the tenant may notify the landlord in writing with copy one of the following: a protection order, a police or court report, a signed document from someone who has assisted the tenant, a statement or other evidence. However, The housing provider may not require any of that documentation. When the housing provider becomes aware that one of those 4 types of behavior has occurred, the law favors the word of the victim, and the provider is required to take steps to remediate the situation and keep the person safe. So, as I said, there's a lot of detail involved with this connection between fair housing law and the Violence Against Women Act. I'd be happy to come back in the fall or the winter if you'd like and do a separate presentation on it. But I wanted for you to be sure to understand this, and there will be links in the handout that I send where you can go into the detail of the provisions of VAWA in regard to fair housing. So, extremely important area for you in working with folks transitioning or attempting to transition out of homelessness is disability. And so big number 1 takeaway is to understand that under federal fair housing law, the individual in the left who clearly has either a short-term or longer-term disability, physical, is covered just as much as the individual on the right who might have severe depression that limits that individual's ability to do everyday things. And so the federal law covers both mental and physical disabilities. So if that impairment substantially limits one or more activities of life, or is regarded as having such an impairment, or if the person has a record of such an impairment, they meet the qualifications of being disabled. Limitation has to be significant or to a large degree. You can read here the major life activities, the kinds of activities, the kinds of things that people who don't have a disability easily do on a day-to-day basis. So why is this important? Well, because if a person meets the definition of a disability, mental or physical, the Fair Housing Act allows for that individual to request a reasonable accommodation or a reasonable modification so they can fully enjoy the apartment or the home in which they live, just like anybody else who doesn't have a disability. Here is a list of the kinds of specific conditions that fall within the definition of disability. I'm not going to read it to you, but I will point out the very last one, which is that persons recovering from drug addiction and alcoholism qualify as being disabled under federal law. However, they cannot be currently using drugs or alcohol. So what about these reasonable accommodations and modifications? Key questions. Is the person disabled according to the fair housing law? Does the needed accommodation or modification relate to the disability? And is the accommodation or modification reasonable? So the person who has a disability can make the request in any way that they wish. It can be verbal. We do not advise that. It's very important, in our opinion, to have a paper trail or an email trail documenting, what, when, where the request was made. The tenant doesn't have to use the term reasonable accommodation or modification. A lot of syllables there. They can just say what their need is. They can make this request at any time, when they sign the lease, before they move in, after they move in, a year after they're living there. And they just need to state that they're requesting a structural change or an exception or an adjustment to a rule or a policy or practice because of the disability. So that's what an accommodation is all about, an exception to a normal rule or policy or practice that allows a person the equal opportunity to enjoy the dwelling. The financial burden generally falls on the housing provider for reasonable accommodations. Now, once that request is made, the housing provider has a legal obligation to engage in an interactive dialogue. This comes out of, as you can imagine, decades of federal cases that have worked their way through the courts where juries have found that persons violating the law have to act in a timely manner. So the clock is ticking for the provider once the person with a disability makes the request. So the provider may request information verifying that a qualifying disability does exist, but only in response to the person making the request for reasonable accommodation or modification. And there must be an identifiable relationship or connection nexus between the request, modification, or accommodation and the person's disability. The request does not have to be made directly by the person with the disability. It can be made by someone on that individual's behalf. So if you as a professional in an agency help to craft a letter and simply have the individual sign it, for example, that would constitute sufficient documentation for the request. So let's talk about service and emotional support animals. Biggest takeaway on this is they are not pets and they are not subject to any pet policies that a landlord may have on the books. Requesting to be allowed to have an assistance animal or emotional support animal is a reasonable accommodation under the federal and state fair housing laws. Unlike the American Disability Act, the federal law makes no distinction between a service animal, for example, a highly trained seeing eye dog, and the emotional support animal. In the eyes of the federal fair housing law, they are the same. In most cases, the tenant just needs to provide a letter from an appropriate professional, and that the landlord cannot request that it be from a doctor. It can be from a case manager, a social worker, counselor, anyone in a position of professional activity in a recognized agency. And there can be no restrictions on the type of animal that is that functions as a support animal. It can be a dog, a cat, bird, snake, you name it, miniature horse. There can be no restrictions on the breed or the weight of the animal. So these are important points to take away. I'm going to probably mention more than once that it takes courage for people to submit these requests, not only the reasonable accommodations, but complaints of any kind. They need the support of their community that they live in. But it's all of our obligation to see that persons with disabilities can fully enjoy their housing.
John Paul.
Yes.
Sorry, this is Kelly. For the emotional support animal, does that only pertain to like rentals and or does it also pertain to like shelter?
That's a very good question. So in the material that I'm going to send you, you will see a link to an article about when is a shelter considered permanent housing. That's what it comes down to, because the fair housing law applies when it's considered an ongoing housing situation for the individual. So for example, I spoke to a group that operates a shelter where the individual signs a 6-month lease to live there. They are definitely going to be covered by fair housing laws. So it's kind of a gray area. And the article that I send you will provide some clarity on that. Does that help?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you.
And if there are other questions coming up, please go right ahead. Modifications. The difference between a reasonable accommodation and a modification is the modification means a physical change or alteration to the dwelling unit. And the financial burden for modifications usually falls on the tenant, not the landlord. And the provider may be responsible for payment if they receive federal funds or if the modification should have already been in place. Here's a key point for you to take away also is this very important date, which is March 1st, 1991. And buildings built after that date must meet a higher requirement for accessibility. You can see the 7 fair housing accessibility requirements, ranging from an accessible entrance all the way through usable bathrooms and kitchens. That means, there has to be enough room for a wheelchair to turn around 360 in the kitchen. The bathrooms have to be safe with grab bars, etc. That would apply to homes built after March 1991. So if it's an older building, then these would not apply. If it's a newer building, they would. Again, detail on this in the handout. So what's new in the housing field? Colorado has been a leader in expanding fair housing protections. And the newest one is one that is going to become law as we sit here, and is going to go into effect on approximately August the 8th, 2023. And those are new protections for residential tenants, which I'll talk about in a minute. And working our way up, we can see the source of income protection. It added source of income was a protected class and as of January 1, 2021. And veterans and military status was added as a protected class effective last August. So this tells a story very briefly of the source of income protection law. And it is the basis for our campaign statewide now to bring the features of this law to greater public attention. It's called A Place Called Better, and it was funded by the Denver Foundation.
Discrimination at any level should have zero toleration.
We heard from Coloradans who were applying for Section 8 vouchers, who were then going and applying for housing and were being routinely denied.
I'm here in this homeless shelter in Denver because I walked out of a marriage. There was abuse going on in the house.
Many of the stories behind those who are being discriminated against have so much depth of challenge. I mean, there are so many other factors that go along with this journey.
We've been married for 13 years. We've been together for 18 though.
When you're living in a motel, the rent's like $400 to $500 a week. We just want our own place, and we had it. We had it before, and we want it back.
If you even mention like assistance, like you're off the list, they're not gonna rent to you.
I'd already secured the place to move in, but I just wanted to use that assistance to supplement. And we were highly discouraged away from it.
The in-between is what kind of sucks. Like right now is the in-between.
I've been an addict and I've been an alcoholic, struggling probably since I was 18. We got off the streets together in Boulder. He did have a housing voucher. It was almost impossible. We thought it was kind of like, well, we're gonna be homeless, we're gonna be back homeless. Because a lot of places were telling us, we don't take vouchers, we don't accept people with vouchers. And then we want 3 times the amount and a high credit score. And how are you supposed to have all these things when you're just coming up off the streets? Once you're down so far, how much further can you get?
You can have a great idea whose time has come, but then you need to have some legislation that puts some legs upon this great idea in order to get it into law and policy.
In 2020, we passed House Bill 20-1332, which prohibited discrimination based on your source of income. That went into effect and became law in Colorado, January 1, 2021. So proud of that work. No matter how you are making your payments, whether that is you're paying it yourself, you're utilizing a combination of a housing voucher and your own personal funds, none of those sources of income can be used to discriminate against you.
It cannot be looked at as less than. It is now part of the legislation, it's part of the law, and so now has to be accepted. And the real challenge now is how do you enforce it with landlords? Unless there's enforcement, then the laws and policies are just a wonderful piece of paper. You need to read, study, go online, and discover your obligations as a landlord, but also understand the privilege of being a landlord.
Yeah, I want to work. Tomorrow's job interview is for overnight kitchen cleaning. I have no problem getting dirty. Yeah, a change would be great. Because, you know, when you're struggling with alcohol and drug addiction, it could go either way, you know? And it's like, I just wanted to go that way. Yeah, the good way.
What a joy to be able to partner alongside the Denver Metro Fair Housing Center in order to ensure that complaints are processed, that tenants know their rights, and that people are able to access affordable housing here across the city.
So what the Denver Metro Housing Center does is raise the alarm and bring about awareness that this is what's happening in our community. Homelessness, foreclosure, eviction. It's not as far removed from you as you think. The hope and the goal is that we can come out and get to a place called better, but that we can come out and get to a place called better together.
So I say it again, it takes courage for people to file a complaint. We know that most landlords want to abide by the law. But we're not sure that all landlords really fully understand the law. So persons who have been discriminated against need your support to file a complaint when discrimination happens. And we're going to talk about how that complaint can be filed. Here are the facts on the source of discrimination, source of income discrimination. Refusing to accept a housing voucher, not counting the voucher value in the income to rent ratio, or steering housing voucher holders to other locations. These are all violations of the law that went into effect January 1, 2021. The brand new law, which will go into effect in August, enhances and strengthens these protections. For the first time in Colorado, it will be against the law for a landlord to require a housing voucher holder to have more than 2 times the monthly income to rent ratio. It will be against the law for a landlord to exceed the deposit cap for persons with housing vouchers, 2 months rent. It will be against the law to require a tenant to reveal their credit score. These folks who have housing vouchers have already been vetted when they applied for the vouchers. So unless it's required by federal law, the credit score requirement will be illegal on the part of any landlord. So help us. This is the beginning of the campaign. You're the first regional group I'm bringing this to. We need to go deeper. You're the center of a hub. Please invite us to come out and bring our message, bring that short video to church groups, to your local municipal government leaders. That video needs to be on a website of every housing authority in the state. You can make that happen. Just let us know. We'll be there. We'll give you the resources to go forward. And for the first time, these new provisions of the law that will go into effect in August provide fines for violations. The first one is a $50 fine, first violation. Second violation will be $2,500. How do you file a complaint? There's 2 routes. Everything we just talked about with source of income goes beyond what's covered by the federal law. So it would be a complaint that would be filed with the Colorado Civil Rights Division. You can make that complaint directly to CCRD, or if the person lives in one of our 7 counties, we'll help you. We'll do the necessary research and investigation work to submit a strong complaint to CCRD. If it's a violation of federal fair housing law, it is filed with HUD and can go to the United States District Court in Denver. And in order to file a complaint, all the person needs to do is call our office, and we have a very personalized service. We have bilingual staff. We have a language line where we can accommodate up to 12 different languages. And we will help talk the person through in a very personalized way what their situation is, determine whether or not it looks like it violates the law, and help them to file a strong complaint. What are the important differences between the state and the federal complaint process? Well, the wheels of justice turn a little faster on the state level, believe it or not. We're talking about weeks or months to process a complaint. If there are no fees involved in processing the complaint on the state level, and it involves a mediation process where the landlord is called in to meet with the tenant, and there's an attempt to mediate it. If it can't be resolved, then it's taken to an administrative law judge and to another piece of the state government called the Civil Rights Commission. Now, on a federal level, there are filing fees involved. You really do need to have legal representation. And the complaints can take years sometimes to win their way through the federal courts. The good news for the consumer is they don't have to pick between one or the other. Say it's a violation of a disability law. You can file the complaint on the state level or on the federal level. And also our staff can connect the person to a pro bono attorney or a legal services attorney, or sometimes HUD will provide an attorney to represent the individual in the federal court. The other big difference is the size of the judgments. The financial judgments that can be levied in the federal court is much bigger than on the state level. And I'll leave you with a thought, which is the single biggest settlement in the history of fair housing law took place last fall in Washington, D.C., when a federal judge ruled in a case involving a housing voucher holder that this large landlord that operated many apartment buildings in D.C. had to pay a fine of $10 million. That money was put into a fund by the city of Washington, D.C. and given out in supports to people who needed deposits to rent apartments or other kinds of financial supports to make it in the housing market. Well, you say, how could it be? How could the federal judge rule in favor of a housing voucher holder? Well, it happens that 95% of all housing voucher holders in Washington, D.C. are Black. And so the federal judge ruled that it was de facto racial discrimination and violated federal fair housing laws. And keep in mind that statewide housing voucher holders, we see from the Department of Local Affairs that over 80%, 4 out of 5 of all housing voucher holders in Colorado live in a household with one person with a disability. So we see overlap between these categories. When you file a complaint with us, we go through a careful intake process. We do an investigation to make sure we collect all the necessary documentation and testimonials. And then we make a determination. Is there a reasonable cause to go forward or not? And if there is, then we help the individual to file a complaint in the appropriate venue. This is our phone number. When in doubt, pick up the phone, call us. We're not a big bureaucracy. You're going to talk to either Regina Jones or Vanessa Garcia at 720-279-4291. If you just need definition, you need some help, you're not sure if it's discrimination or not, if it smells like discrimination, pick up the phone and give us a call. So I guess that's the thought I'd leave you with. When in doubt, pick up the phone, help us. Let's help spread this message. There's a lot of people on this webinar today. If every single person here reached out to a church, community organization, university, city official, and maybe call for a forum in your community, so that invite landlords. Give us a connection to the Landlord Association in Northern Colorado. We're going to be giving a presentation like this to the Landlord Association in Southern Colorado. We want to do it in every single part of the state. We believe that Coloradans are better than this. That the level of discrimination going on against people today is unacceptable, that the average Coloradan would not consider it acceptable, and it's against the law. So we want to work with you to see that people's legal rights are honored, respected, and enforced. And I'll stop there. I know we got a lot of people on here, but Kelly, do we have some questions?
Let's see. So we don't have any questions in the chat except for a comment of lots of questions. So it looks like we only have a couple minutes right now for questions. We do have another presenter. So I'm wondering, we can maybe take one or two, and then if you all want to have your questions in the chat, I can perhaps communicate with John Paul about that, and we'll be sending out a lot more information on this.
I will answer every question sent in the chat. You will get the resource sheet as long as you give us your email. And yeah, I see somebody has their hand up.
Yeah, Chuck, if you have a quick question, I'd be let's hear it.
Does it apply to undocumented people?
Yes, the federal fair housing laws apply regardless of the person's immigration status.
Thanks, John.
We have about 5 minutes more for questions if folks do have anything they'd like to ask right now. Otherwise, please feel free to put it in the chat and we will have it followed up on. Someone asked, is there more information about not requiring credit scores?
Well, in the PDF I'm going to send you, there will be a link to the actual text of the new law. It's called Senate Bill 23-184, and that you can see the detail on the ban on landlords requiring credit scores from people with housing vouchers.
Great.
Are credit scores required still, though, if it's not a housing voucher?
The way the law is written, it appears it would apply to people who have public supported sources of income in the housing market. So that would include housing vouchers, but my reading of it is brand new, and of course it's brand new. So I'm not an attorney, but my reading of the law and checking with some of the lobbyists for the Coalition for the Homeless is that it applies to people who are publicly assisted forms of housing support.
Right. So since I know you had mentioned your organization does represent people in the Denver metro area in those counties that you showed. For folks up here, if we have advocates on the line, we have people that are working with people experiencing homelessness. What's the best way for them to file a complaint, get legal assistance, anything of that nature?
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Again, on the PDF that you'll receive at the very top of it, you will have the phone number and the web address for the Colorado Civil Rights Division, which is the place to go, especially with these source of income violations. And it'll also have the 800 number and the link for the place to file a federal complaint directly with HUD. And we hope to expand our service area in the years to come. We're always looking for HUD to give us permission to serve more of the state. Our population is growing. Unfortunately, discrimination is growing. But for now, you will be able to access that either from CCRD or HUD.
Great. Well, John Paul, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. And everyone, I'll make sure you get all of the information. If you would like to have your email put in the chat, I can share those directly with John Paul, and he can also send information to you directly as well.
Thanks, Kelly. And if you joined late and you didn't see the link that Kelly put in the chat for the anonymous survey, please take that, because that helps us to get the grant money to keep doing these presentations for free. Thank you so much, and thank you for the great work that you do.
Thank you. All right, excellent. So we're going to transition now to our presentation on our point in time and housing inventory count. So I'm going to turn this over to Rachel Kirkland, our HMIS administrator.
Thanks, Kelly. That was a really amazing presentation from John. It's going to be hard to follow and keep everyone as engaged as we look at data, but I'll do my best. And Kelly, For the sake of time, there is something after me, correct? Just want to
There
speak.
is, yes, we have a partner spotlight. So if we can try to wrap up by 10:45 or 10:47, that would be good.
Okay. Sorry, one second. I'm trying to find. I have a hard time sharing my screen while in a PowerPoint presentation. Let's see. Okay. Right. So just going to go over the data from the 2023 point in time count and do a little bit of year-over-year analysis. I'm going to start with just this quick background slide. So for those of you who are not familiar, the point in time count is an unduplicated count on a single night in northern Colorado. It happens nationwide. It's a federally mandated count. Our point in time count this year was conducted on January 24th, 2023. And this information is provided to the AHAR report. So this is the report meant to inform Congress about the number of people experiencing homelessness. And this PIT data is included in our longitudinal system analysis, which includes data from our HMIS system for the entire year. So it's not the only source of data that they get. And yeah, so I'm going to jump into this information. So first, let's see. We're going to look at the point in time count on the NoCO CoC website, or we have a dashboard linked in the NoCO CoC website. So this is a little plug for the NoCO CoC website. If you haven't looked around at it, I highly recommend. And if you have looked around, you may have already seen the dashboard. But if you are on the NoCO CoC website, there's a tab called Get Informed, and then there's a tab for data and reports, and you'll find there is some CAPS data here, which I'll just do a quick plug on as well. This is CAPS data from the last month, so you can find that on the NoCO CoC website. I'm not going to get into it right now. And then the 2023 PIT count data dashboard is here as well. So this is our 2023 point in time count overview. So this is an interactive dashboard. You all have access to this. I'm just going to quickly walk through how to utilize the dashboard. So it is interactive, meaning if we just want to look at the sheltered population, we can click on the sheltered population up here, and the whole dashboard will be filtered by people who are sheltered. And so now you can see it's only including folks in emergency shelter and transitional housing. If we scroll down, these are the demographics of the population. So their race, ethnicity, gender, age tier, and disabling condition status. And then down at the bottom, you can see how this information was collected. So a large portion of our data comes from our HMIS system. And then we also used an app called Survey 123 this year, where providers conducted client level surveys. And then these are all of the amazing agencies who helped with this year's point in time count, whether that was entering their HMIS data or collecting surveys in Survey 123 by literally going out and surveying people where they stay on the streets. So you can also filter this by population type if we just want to look at adults. You can do adults and youth, or you can do just families. And it just something to note, if you for youth parenting households, those are included as families. You can see that there were no unsheltered families in the point in time count, and I think that's pretty standard in northern Colorado. Another thing to look at is the chronic homeless population. So when I filter by chronically homeless population, you see the unsheltered percentage goes significantly up. So if you're experiencing chronic homelessness, you're much more likely to be unsheltered on the night of the point in time count. And in looking at just the unsheltered population, you can see that there's really high rates of disabling conditions, and it's a predominantly male population that we're seeing unsheltered. So I'm going to move on to some of the year-over-year content. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat for the sake of time. But again, this is available on the NoCO CoC point in time, or the NoCO CoC website. And I believe it will stay published there. I'm going to switch back over to the PowerPoint. Try to. All right. So the next thing that we did with the point in time data is we conducted a racial disparities analysis. So this is data from the American Census Survey. So this is looking at the total population and then looking at the total population that's in poverty, and then looking at the population that is experiencing homelessness in our PIT count, and then looking at the population that's experiencing unsheltered homelessness in our PIT count. And so some things to note is it's no surprise, I think we're all very well aware of this, that people of color are just disproportionately overrepresented in populations that experience poverty and homelessness. We can also see that the white population and the American Indian, Alaskan Native or Indigenous population is more likely to experience unsheltered homelessness. And we see the percentages of Native Hawaiian or Black, African American, African populations go down when we're looking at the unsheltered homeless population. Looking at the ethnic disparities in people experiencing homelessness, this is the same. We get the data from the American Census Survey. So we're looking at the total population, the population in poverty, the population experiencing homelessness, and the population experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And so with this data, you can again see that people who identify as Hispanic, Latino are more likely to experience poverty and homelessness. And then we can also see that they're less likely to experience unsheltered homelessness if they are experiencing homelessness. Sorry, I should say that caveat. We also have the breakdowns of these disparities by Larimer and Weld County, but for the sake of time, I wasn't going to show them today, but I can definitely include those in the slides if this information gets disseminated. I believe Kelly's also working on a point in time report for the CoC. So this is looking at the data over time. So we're looking at our counts from 2020 to 2023. You can see in 2021, we did not conduct an unsheltered count because it was not required. But I believe moving forward, we will always conduct an unsheltered count, whether or not it's required, so that we have some consistency in our data. So looking at the numbers, we can see that there was quite a spike in the count from 2022 to 2023. And we can probably, I would say, lend that to the way that the count was conducted in 2023. We significantly changed the processes. In 2022, the count in Fort Collins specifically was only using HMIS data. In 2023, we did HMIS data in addition to surveys. There was quite a big effort to survey in Weld County as well.
I will just also note, and this will be in the report Rachel mentioned, in 2023, we were able to expand the locations that we counted. So we counted up in Estes Park, in Berthoud, in Windsor, and in Fort Lupton. And the previous years, the vast majority of the count was just in Fort Collins, Loveland, and Greeley.
Thanks, Kelly. And from 2022 to 2023, you can see that the unsheltered count actually went, despite the overall count going up, the unsheltered count did go down. This is looking at the percentage of our populations during the counts, whether they were sheltered or unsheltered. And again, we did not have a count for unsheltered in 2021. This is the race of the total population counted in the pit year over year. So there was kind of a trend of showing that the population was becoming proportionately less white, and we see that percentage is going back up in 2023. I also thought it would be interesting to share the race breakdowns of the populations getting enrolled into these projects at HMIS, and this is for the entire year of 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023, not just a single night. So if we look at this information, you can see that the population is proportionately less white over the years. And this is, this is definitely a more accurate representation of our homeless population because it is encompassing all enrollments in these projects throughout every month of each year. So I definitely think it's important to share that context when we're looking at the point in time data, that we do have access to a lot more robust data, that we can actually look at our information a little bit more holistically. Here we can see the ethnicity makeup of our point in time count over the years, and we can see that this has gradually increased since 2020. And then looking at our populations, the Hispanic population in our HMIS enrollments.
So just to clarify, that first graph, that's from the point in time count. And then this next one is using our HMIS data, pulling a report.
Correct, yes.
Correct, okay.
And this is actually 16. It's more, I would say it's probably a little bit more accurate. So the numbers are not as different as they are in the race population, or the population by race.
Mm-hmm.
So this is looking at the disabling conditions and barriers and the people who are counted in the point in time count. This is adults only. So this is, again, point in time count data year over year. So the most notable thing is that I would say is that we had a significant hike in folks identifying with a substance use disorder from 2020 to 2021. And there is a fairly significant hike in mental health disorders, people identifying with those as well from 2020 to 2021. And this is, again, in our point in time count data. But for this, we also looked at the HMIS data, and we can see that that hike aligns with the data in HMIS as well. So I thought that was interesting that we saw, despite the fact that this is just data from a single night, it aligns very well with the HMIS data in terms of all enrollments within these years. We see, again, that hike from 2020 to 2021 in substance use disorder goes from 11% to 26%. And then in mental health disorder, that goes from 17% in 2021 to 27% in 2021. So significant hikes there in both the HMIS data and the point in time count data. And now I'm going to share, let's see. We're going to look at a little bit of the HIC data, the housing inventory count. So again, for those of you who are not familiar, the housing inventory count is a point in time inventory count. This happens on the same night as the point in time count. And this is counting all of our housing resources within the community. So that includes emergency shelter projects, transitional housing, any kind of permanent housing, so rapid rehousing, PSH. I think I listed them all. So we attempt to include every single provider in both Larimer and Weld County in our housing inventory count. And then just some additional context as we look at these numbers year over year, the Northern Colorado CoC broke off from the balance of state in 2020. So each year since then, Northern Colorado has, attempted to improve our processes to ensure that this data is as accurate as possible. So some of the changes over time could be a reflection of our data becoming more accurate, or it could be an actual significant change that's happening in the community. And we'll try to point those out as we walk through them. So first, we're going to look at utilization rates. We look at utilization rates to see how well we are utilizing the existing resources that we have. So this is looking at how full were the emergency shelters, how many people were staying in transitional housing, how many people were using the PSH vouchers that we have in our community on the night of the point in time count. And here we can see that we have a gradual increase of our emergency shelter utilization through 2022, and then it kind of drops a little bit again in 2023. And I do just want to note that this is not including DV shelters, and this is not including, we had a couple of IRQ sites in our housing inventory count in, I believe, 2021 and 2022, which we did not include in this because DV shelters and IRQ sites, it's not, we're not trying to fill them up to capacity necessarily, but there is a filter on this. So if we did want to look specifically at the DV shelters, we can see that they generally hang around 40 to 50% utilization rate. And then you can see those permanent housing resources are always 100% capacity. And our permanent housing resources, I would again note that those are all typically hanging around 90 to 100% of utilization. One thing to note on how rapid rehousing and tenant-based vouchers are counted is they're only counted in our housing inventory count if they are occupied. So it kind of sways the utilization rate a little bit. Like, for example, housing or rapid rehousing will always have a 100% utilization rate. Because it only counts as housing inventory if somebody is actually using rapid rehousing dollars to be in housing. Next, we're going to quickly take a look at the HMIS participation rate. So this is from 2020 to 2023. So this is looking at the percentage of the projects that are included in our housing inventory count and whether or not they're using HMIS as their system. And so you can see that our emergency shelter utilization rate increased significantly from 2020 to 2023 from 63% to 92%. So a big jump there and a huge thanks to all the emergency shelters who are entering data on a regular basis into HMIS. We can see that there were increases in the rest of our projects as well. So PSH has gone up 10%, rapid rehousing has gone up 20%, and then transitional housing has doubled from 33% to 66%.
I'll just plug, like, our goal is to have any project that's able to be in HMIS, because then we can have we can show exactly what's going on with our homeless system. So it's really exciting to see that we've got such high utilization already. But hopefully next year we'll see even more.
And I do just want to note too, I think Kelly, you talked about our NoCO score at the beginning of the meeting and how that increased. And I would just say that some of these data points that we're looking at, they directly impact our NoCO. So like our utilization rates and our HMIS participation rates, those are directly impacting our NoCO score. HMIS participation rate. So this is looking at the emergency shelter and transitional housing resources year over year. So we can see that these are the total beds available in emergency shelter and transitional housing. So it looks like, the beds have gone a little bit up since 2020. There was a bigger spike in 2021, which is kind of odd considering that was COVID year. But I think that what happened is in 2021, folks were counting their beds as they normally would, but not utilizing them at 100%. And then in 2022, they started to count based off of, okay, this is what we can actually use. So there was a little bit of confusion there between 2021 and 2022 about how to count emergency shelter beds, given that shelters were operating at a totally different capacity due to social distancing. And then you can see the utilization rate has gradually increased over time of these projects as well. Permanent housing resources. I think this is really amazing that we got a lot of rapid rehousing ESG CV funding to launch some rapid rehousing projects. That funding, a lot of it came in 2021, and then we saw a lot of more people actually be housed with that funding in 2022, and we're still kind of sustaining it in 2023. So I think that's really great to note that our rapid rehousing inventory has stayed much higher than it was obviously in 2020. And our PSH resources have gradually increased as well. And they all stay pretty significantly utilized as well. So. And then on the last slide, I won't go through this whole thing. This is more so like for you guys to look at if you're interested. This is utilization by project, project name over the years. So you can see all of the projects and how they're utilized year over year. If it's completely empty, that means that that project did not exist in those previous years. So just something to note. Does not mean zero utilization. It just means that they were not there. So. Right. That is all I have. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to take them, but also all of this content and information will be provided to you so you can look at it independently and send us questions later on as well.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Yeah, so those two dashboards are available on our website. Feel free to poke at them. I know for me, I have to like stare at it and think about it for a while before I'm like, oh, that's, make inferences. We are going to be releasing a point in time count, housing inventory count report. I'm in the process of writing it right now. And so this was a preview of that. It'll go a little bit more into depth and give some kind of inferences on the data and why we might be seeing certain trends, things of that nature. And so, but if anyone has questions for Rachel on the point in time count or the HMIS data she showed, we do have a couple minutes here. All right, well, we are going to now share. So we're going to start, we're going to try to do things a little bit different. Instead of doing, the last block as partner share outs, we want to highlight a partner spotlight agency. So have someone come and talk about what their agency is doing, what resources they have, how they are available and kind of interacting in Larimer and Weld County for people experiencing homelessness. And so I want to turn it over now to Christina Garcia from the Community Economic Defense Project.
Thank you, Kelly. Hi, everyone. I'm Christina Garcia. I'm the head of programs here at the Community Economic Defense Project. And I am accompanied by Teresia, who is our manager over at the Care Center. She's going to be helping to jump in on anything that I may forget, as this is such a large group and there's so many squares that can be intimidating with all of the information that we have to provide in such a short period of time. So thank you again for welcoming us to this space, and excited to be able to share the information about our organization to you all. Abed, if I can share my screen, I'm gonna make this one a little bit bigger so you don't see. Okay, is it working? Is it working? There we go. Can you all see this guy right here? Okay, perfect. So CEDP has been around since 2020, 2021. We were birthed out of the pandemic, really in response to the evictions that we were starting to see as a result of that. Our intention really is to, build economic security across folks for Coloradans, really with a lens towards racial equity. I'm trying to go really fast here. There's quite a few slides that I'm going to get through.
Yeah, and Christina, we actually are ahead of time, so you have about 15 minutes if you want. So just say
cool. Okay, perfect. I wasn't sure if you had anything after this, so I was like, so what's really cool about our organization is that we are able to process emergency rental assistance within days, and I've even seen it done within the same day, as long as we have all of the documentation. We've really, because we were birthed during the pandemic, we are a really tech-forward organization that just really streamlines access to the services for folks. We have everyone from resource navigators to case management to tenant advocates and homeowner advocates, and a full-on care center that is essentially a call center for folks that we serve everyone in Colorado to be able to connect them to the resources that they need as quickly as possible. And the biggest point of all of this is that we still have funding, y'all. So I know ERAP has been drying up across the state, but I just wanted to make sure that we share that our services are still in full effect and can be provided to your all clients. We are also at court. We're seeing that a lot of people aren't aware of the emergency rental assistance that is still available. We've posted up at several different courthouses across Colorado to try to inform folks of the services. And what we're seeing is that over half of the folks are not aware of the resources. And so we're tracking like who all is like receiving their initial application and whether or not they knew about the resources, and over half of them don't, which is a true tragedy. And so that's why we really wanted to meet with you all today to let you know that we have this assistance available and how to connect your clients to it if they are eligible. The state has listed a bunch of restrictions as part of their wind down efforts for it, where they can't have received assistance within the last 12 months, and they will require a summons, an FED, in order to be able to provide them assistance at this point. But if your clients do have a summons, I'll share out how to get in contact, how to connect them over to us quickly. And like I said, it doesn't take months for us to move to get people the assistance out. We can do it really, really quickly and work. We even deliver checks to court. We, can pay out the client if they're not, if the landlord is refusing payment. And we've stopped sheriffs in their tracks from evicting people, which is really, really important. As I mentioned, we have a foreclosure prevention team. This program is one of our newer ones that we've launched in the past several months. And it's also to, prevent folks from becoming homeless and losing their homes. This program seems to have a lot more flexibility in that we are able to pay for lot rent, we're able to pay for utility assistance and whatnot. And again, I'll share out the information on how to connect your people to this if they are in need of this. As referenced, we have also been providing case management support to folks that had lost their housing, for whom we weren't able to prevent the eviction. And we've been providing rehousing support across the state. We have housing navigators that work with landlords directly. We've stood up our own housing navigation fund where we're paying out application fees for folks, holding fees, and all of the ridiculous fees that landlords are now requesting as part of their efforts to circumvent that source of income discrimination law that we're seeing. And we have supported folks in hotels while we were transitioning them into housing. Unfortunately, with the wind down, it's not accepting new referrals into this program, but we're working on our last few folks to connect them into housing, and we hope to be able to expand this program here in the near future. And the majority of folks that we're seeing now don't qualify for ERAP assistance. They either have received assistance in the last 12 months or maybe aren't in that eviction, late eviction process. And so our resource connection team that can be accessed through our care center does a really good job of scavenging the entire state for resources that are available to maybe offset the cost that they would normally need, use to pay for food or utilities or childcare or anything else that could possibly support them, so that they do have some funds to be able to put towards their rent. And like I said, it's across the state. And if you all aren't, listed on Find Help or in 211, please connect with us so that we can make sure that we're connecting folks to your resources if that's possible. And would love to just continue the partnership on, between service providers so that we're seamlessly connecting people to anything that they could qualify for. And another cool thing about our organization is that we have a legal arm as part of our org, and our team is able to bridge clients quickly into our law firm that who may need additional support with fighting the case against their landlords. Folks can also self-refer directly on our website and request legal assistance. I can share out these slides. I can send them to Kelly, and she can send them to you all as well, so you can have them. But our legal team works with people across the state and does a really good job of supporting clients in partnership with, our CLS and Colorado Poverty Law. And they're also at the courthouses trying to support people who don't know about the resources, and we catch them right before they go into the courthouse with their summons, helping them file answers or get any of the services that we can possibly provide to keep people from losing their homes. And, we don't do this work by ourselves. We're deeply integrated into the community, and that is our intention of being here with you all today and being part of this CoC is, it takes a village, right? Like none of us can do this alone. And, really appreciate all of the partnerships that we have across the state, and, continue our fight to keep people housed. So here's the information on how to get folks connected. And again, I'll share these slides out so that you all can have it. But if folks go to our website or call our care center, we can get them referred over and determine eligibility, words, you guys, and get them the assistance that they need. If anyone is interested in, has a huge need in their community of folks needing rental assistance, we're happy to build a direct partnership with agencies as well. We've done that with various different agencies across the state where you all can have your own specific intake form that will go directly to one of our service team members, and we can, make sure that there's consistent communication and you know where everyone that you refer, what their status is through the application process. If you're interested in that, just email info@cdpproject.org, and we will build that out. But thank you again, and grateful to be in community with you all.
Thank you, Christina. That's great. So can you clarify all of these services that you just shared, including the legal assistance, is that accessible for folks that are living in Larimer and Weld County as well?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Perfect. Does anyone have any questions on the community economic defense project? We'll definitely be sending all of this information out.
And Teresha, if there was anything I missed, please try to speed talk.
No, not at all. That was a great overview. You hit everything. My only thing that was left out was towing, that we also assist with the towing from private residents in conjunction with, I think it's SB 22-1314, if I'm not mistaken, for the towing bill of rights, but everything else was beautiful.
Thank you, Teresha.
Great. Wonderful. Thanks so much. So we have just a couple minutes. If there are any burning agency updates or information that you think would be helpful for those in the group, please go ahead and raise your hand. We have about 7 minutes. Otherwise, you're welcome to put that in the chat, and I can share all of this out in our minutes, and I'll be sending a recap email to everyone. Allison?
Thank you. So we have our South Railroad facility up and running now as of April 12th. And we have an area where people with mobility disabilities and some other disabilities can sleep, and that's at the Loveland Resource Center. We're full. So we're seeing people come here from other communities. And my guess is that they believe that we have capacity. And we really don't at this stage. So please know that we have a hard capacity at the South Railroad site because it's based on beds. We have kind of a soft capacity at our Loveland Resource Center, but we're capping it at 22 right now. So if in other communities, there are ideas that we have the ability to shelter more people, we're now turning people away. So just wanted to let you know that at some point, like next winter, we'll have more capacity, but I know that other communities will as well.
Thanks, Allison. Is the South Railroad site still doing tours? I know.
Yes.
Okay. Is that something do you want me to share that out to folks in case that?
Yeah, I don't have, oh, Dylan does.
Hi, I jumped off too fast. Sorry, y'all. Yes, so we have one that is upcoming on the 24th, I believe. So we have a few slots in both of them. Allison's going to add my email. If you are interested in that, please feel free to reach out to me. We will essentially be adding tours until there isn't a need. Every single one of them has been at that 15 cap mark for amount of people. So please sign up quickly and reach out if you do.
And yes, Michelle, but we have people who have come here from other states, from Boulder, from Denver, from, it's not just Greeley and Fort Collins, but we had heard some time ago by some people who did come here from Fort Collins that they came here because they had heard that we had additional capacity.
Yeah. Allison, there's a question in the chat if it's overflow at the resource center or it's just for ADA.
So it's a little bit of both. It is for accommodating people who have some mobility disabilities, but we're also using it for overflow. We are capping it at 22, but I think that we have to take a look at whether or not it needs to be 20. So those numbers will go down before they'll go up.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, any other quick updates? Okay, well, thank you all so much for your time and your attention. I will be, so this meeting was recorded. I'm going to put a link to the video on our website and send out a recap of all the resources that our presenters had talked about. Again, those dashboards, the data dashboards are on our website if you'd like to poke around on them. Happy to talk more about data with you and be on the lookout for that report, the point in time count housing inventory count report. So anyway, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your Thursday. Bye-bye.